don't know me. Let me go ahead and start recording. Okay, FSW13. Welcome to our discussion on Node.js. My name is Ryan Hamblin. I'm the program director for the full stack web team. So if anything is awesome that you love about the full stack web team, about the curriculum, let me know. If there's anything that's off the mark, let me know as well. My DMs are open. Okay, so I'm really excited to be here. I have been at Lambda School since day one. I was with the very, very first cohort, writing and teaching curriculum pretty much at the same time. For the last 5 years or so, I have been educating, self-educating / doing boot camps / figuring out how to become a web developer. I then became a web developer, then worked full-time for various startups on engineering teams of 15 to 20 people, and on engineering teams of me being the only person on the engineering team for the front end particularly. So I primarily have worked for startups, moved on, joined Lambda School because after I graduated boot camp scenes, I became an instructor at other boot camps. I became a mentor. I did a lot of the free code camp scene where on Saturdays I would gather with learners and I would help guide people through their journey as well. So I've been a part of this development scene for quite a few years. And so teaching is sort of just always kind of been a passion of mine. I graduated in outdoor recreation management with an emphasis in technical leadership. So it's been kind of a fun way to come full circle, jumping into a career that made a lot more fiscal sense. And yeah, now putting my passion to the wheel. So let's begin. Now that you know a little bit about me, by the way, I am from Salt Lake City, Utah. So I do get together with Josh and Luis every once in a while. Those that you know, Dustin, he lives a little farther away from us, but yeah, I see him occasionally as well. And Caleb, so like there's quite a few of us here. So thank you, Michelle. Appreciate the compliment. I pride myself in loving React, so I'm really grateful for that compliment. Okay, let's do this. Let's start off today with a little bit of review. I'm going to ask you questions, going to have you answer in the questions answers thread there in the FSW13 channel. So I want you to think about this for about 30 seconds and craft an answer. I don't want anyone to submit a question or an answer for about 30 seconds, okay? Why Node.js? Why is Node a thing, and what's so great about Node? Based on what you learned yesterday. So you don't have to go researching this too deep, but I want to know what you think. So give me 30 seconds to answer, and then at the end of 30 seconds, you can post your answers in that thread. While you're typing, I'm going to take my Kylo Ren supplements. All right, go ahead and throw down your answers in the questions answers thread. So why Node.js? Using JavaScript provides consistency in your stack, okay? JavaScript front end, back end, yeah, because you can write JavaScript front end, back end. Better compatibility from the front end to back end. Yeah, everyone said pretty much the same thing. Node manages calls non-blocking and asynchronously, allowing for scalable applications. Adam, what you said is probably my favorite reason behind. All these answers are great. I think that Node.js is a simple way to learn to set up APIs and can become complicated and is very good for things like messaging apps and data-driven things. Very, very true. If every problem was a nail, right, then your only solution would be a hammer, right? However, there are many, many problems out there to solve. So Node.js is not the only tool in your toolkit, nor will it be by the time you finish Lambda School. But it is a good tool for many, many of those nails. So it's not a solve-all solution, but it can be a lot of things. Tom said, I love that it's non-blocking and allows us to write pseudo async code runner. It allows a pseudo async code runner. This allows for some great cross-platform applications. That is also, so combination with what Adam said, and Tom and Brian and Lauren, Alejandro, Marshall, yes, all these things are wonderful. So thanks, Joseph. Thanks for your answers. Okay, so yes, this is exactly why we have Node.js. JavaScript primarily was the front-end de facto language. It is the front-end de facto language of the web, right? There are other languages that target and compile into JavaScript that then compile into whatever language the browser is then interpreting to run its processes. But JavaScript is primarily the de facto web language. So yeah, 2009, crew got together and they're like, hey, that V8 engine is pretty awesome that Google Chrome runs off of. Let's take that and reskin it and put it headless somewhere and add some HTTP interfaces to it and make it a server-side language. So JavaScript front and back. It's awesome that you have the consistency between your front and back end part of your stack. And then the non-blocking part, that's a huge, huge plus. The idea that it is single-threaded, but yeah, when you have code that's going to continue to execute, but you don't have potentially your data back and your asynchronous calls and whatnot, you're going to be able to execute and continue to run your processes. And then all of a sudden, boom, your data is back and you can handle it appropriately, which is a big part of what we're going to be talking about today in the Node.js ecosystem. We're going to be talking about route handlers and basically how to read and interpret data that comes through the World Wide Web via these route handlers, and then how we access those positions. So we're going to be talking about routing in particular. We're going to be talking about CRUD operations, which you already know about. We're going to be talking about how to manually test your web APIs, of course. And we're going to be talking about reading from the requested resource, or the requester, if you will. So how do we interpret data and send data that's key information across the World Wide Web? So will it still be after WebAssembly comes around? Who knows, Brian? I mean, I love the future. I think that WASM, WebAssembly, is really, really cool. I have not dabbled with it at all yet. I have only seen lightning talks and a couple of like little small white papers on it. But Rust is sort of gaining in popularity, and we'll see. Mozilla is pushing that hard. So if Mozilla is pushing something hard, they're usually like MDN, that's Mozilla. So we shall see. I love the idea that we have a futuristic, forward-thinking society. And yeah, there are many, many wheels to continue to reinvent, and there are many wheels that have not been invented yet. So yeah, cool. I love your little preliminary research you've done there on that. Okay, what's Express? Think about that for a couple seconds. What is Express? When you formulate an answer to that, wait like 10 more seconds because I want everyone to be able to think about this. What is Express? Okay, go ahead and post your answers if you got them in that thread again. Just going over the review for right now, and then we'll dive into the nitty-gritty stuff. Not as many were excited to jump on this one. Who wants to help me out here? What is Express? Framework for writing servers, okay. Express is a Node.js module that abstracts logic from Node to make a web server an easier process. Absolutely. Express is a middleware. Boom, love it. Framework for Node, okay, yeah. So, man, so Express can be a framework the same way that React can potentially become a framework as soon as you add other things to it. Express is, yeah, it's like a framework, it's a library, it's a middleware for Node.js. That's a really cool word. We're going to talk in depth about middleware tomorrow, but that's a word that we're going to bring up today. It's a kind of a buzzword. It's a glossary item you should know. by the end of this week, what middleware is, how we work with it, how we write custom middleware. But yeah, we're taking Express basically, and we're writing a node server. So it's going to handle all of the details that we don't necessarily need to handle. So when we call server.listen, we're actually using the Express package, and we're saying, hey, boom, prop this up on a port so that as traffic comes in and out of this port, we can intercept that traffic and do things with that traffic, right? We have this really cool thing called HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. What are we transferring with HTTP? What type of data are we transferring? This one may be a stretch, and it's in there, it's in the name. Stateless data, plain text, exactly. So text, hypertext transfer protocol. So we're transferring text from one machine to another machine. And the way that we do that is by setting up a server that can listen for those traffics, right? Those communications, okay? And so what we do then is we say, hey, we can communicate on this port. We have the ability to communicate on this port. And as a developer, we can actually decide the specific address or the route as to where that communication can take place. So let's dive into yesterday's assignment. We'll pick up right exactly where Luis left off yesterday. I'll share my screen and we'll get to it. Okay. So I have my little node server up and running. Let's walk through this top to bottom. It's kind of what we did yesterday. We're pulling in Express from the node package management registry, so NPM. Pulling in Cord as well from NPM. Okay. So those are actual packages. Those are node packages that live in our node modules, and we get them by NPM installing or running yarn, etc. Okay. So when we go and fetch something, it goes and downloads it into our node modules directory. Okay, that's where those live. Now we're saying, hey, we want to require a database, which you don't need to know tons about. We're going to interface with this database today, but you don't need to know tons about to work with your daily projects today. Now we're instantiating our server. We're saying, hey, this variable is set equal to this function call. Okay, this function call, we're going to invoke our Express package. Okay, which means we're going to start a server. Now we're going to do some configuration on our server. We're going to do all these chainings, these .use, .get, .listen, right? So we're configuring our server so that it can receive traffic across the World Wide Web. This .listen props our server up on a specific port. And it's like we have our own little server that's just listening locally for any traffic that's incoming, okay? So when we write something like a get, or we're going to learn about today, post, put, and delete, okay? We're basically configuring this server, and we're saying, hey, I want to have access at this specific address. So when I route here, we're going to perform the operation that's found between this callback, okay? And this callback right here is called, does anyone know off the top of their head? It's called a route handler, okay? This callback that we pass to all of our route endpoints, okay, is called a route handler. And we're going to talk about that at length, okay? I'm going to hold off on questions for just a little bit because maybe something that I say after we go through this API users, get request, get route, I might answer some of those questions that are coming through. Okay, so if I were to interpret this as a human, okay, I'm going to read this in, human speak, English language human speak. When I say, hey, .get, I want to be able to perform a GET request to the route /API/users. When some other port or some other computer or some other browser is requesting this route, then we're going to execute this route handler, this callback. And then of course it's a node style callback, so you have these two objects that get passed into it when it gets invoked by Express. Those two objects are the homies, right? Rec and res. Okay, so what are we doing inside between lines 20 and 25? Well, we're handling that response. the request came in, we're handling the request, and then we're saying, hey, let's communicate back to the thing that did the request in the first place when we have some sort of information for that thing. So in this case, we're going to do a database lookup. We're going to call .find, which is going to go and look for all the things that we have in our database. We're going to then, so this is part of the non-blocking asynchronicity of JavaScript. This thing right here, if we are calling .then, this function invocation will be a promise or some sort of asynchronous code that will resolve at a different place in time. So we handle it in our promisifying way, .then or .catch. You could use async await here if you wanted to. We're not going to teach async await here at Lambda School because we want you to get the basics of this stuff down, and then you can go learn that on your own, because once you know this, working with async await is trivial. It's just learning the syntax. Okay, so if you wanted to get caught up on some of the latest and greatest ES7 stuff, then yeah, jump right into async await. But that's what we're essentially doing here. Find stuff in a database, give us that stuff back. Here's a callback to handle that information. So all of these callbacks, you should be pretty much used to this kind of stuff by now. This is JavaScript-y, right? This is the way we JavaScript things. We pass around anonymous functions as first-class citizens. We can assign anonymous functions to variables. We can do all these really cool things with functions, which promotes the idea of a functional language. But this is the idea of that non-blocking asynchronicity, because when server.get gets called, we don't have the information that we're going to be doing right away. We have some steps to take. And so we call those callbacks and invoke the things as necessary. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a minute for questions that kind of came through. Yes, Patrick, it is vulnerable to pass just text across the World Wide Web through HTTP. There are security measures that you want to take place, which we are going to talk about when we get to authentication. And then Patrick said, is SQLite what we are learning for the database? Yeah, we're going to be teaching SQL through the lens of SQLite, but really what we teach you are the principles of SQL. So we do teach you some raw SQL queries, okay? And we do teach you kind of how to work with CRUD operations within SQL at large. So SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and it's the language that basically runs a lot of relational databases like MySQL, SQLite, and Postgres. So learning how to work with the SQL language, the Structured Query Language, will allow you to go and just drop right into any of those types of environments and get up to speed in no time. SQLite, it's a little bit easier for a cursory learning platform. So yeah, it's pretty amazing what we're going to be doing with SQLite. And then you learn connects, which is a driver that allows you to work in a JavaScript way with your database save and find, which allows you to do things like db.find, etc. Which we'll dive into that in just a second. Well, later when I present to you more of the topics for this mini, we'll work with the database in the proper way, as we should. It's been a while since I've worked with SQLite, so you may have to bear with me on a couple of debugging sessions. It might be kind of fun. Clint asked, how come we're not using the request object? Very good question. This is a GET request. So primarily, we don't necessarily need our request object, but we're going to be working with the request object at length today, which is going to be really, really fun. Okay, so we'll get there. And then lastly, the thing that's going to happen is we're going to catch an error if there's an error in the database lookup. David did ask, oh, I had this question with the delete endpoint yesterday. How would we go about authentication and not allowing just anyone to remove anything they want? Aha. Very, very good question. So yeah, we're going to talk about that at length during authentication week by saying, oh, does this user making these requests actually have access to the endpoints? And if they don't, then we don't allow them to do any deleting, right? We don't allow them to call any of our endpoints. But yeah, you'll definitely get there. Brian said, so knowing SQLite is close enough to SQL that learning SQL afterwards will be easier. Yeah, so we actually do teach you raw SQL, like a handful of the queries that you need to know to get up and running. And then all of the principles that we teach you through SQLite in terms of your relational concepts will just transfer over to any relational platform that you choose to use in the future, or that you get dropped into an environment at work, and whatnot. So for example, you're going to learn how to interface with SQLite through the Connects driver. A lot of companies use the Connects driver for insert your database du jour here. So really, it's the principles that carry over. It's not necessarily the syntax, but learning how to work with the things that we teach you will get you through the day. Okay, so let's talk about this more at length as we're kind of building out these ideas here. So I'm going to write a couple extra endpoints here, just a couple of extra GET requests that allow us to communicate with our server at different addresses, right? So server.get, and you don't need to follow along here. This is just me right now. So I'm going to do an API/about. Pass in our node style callback. By that I mean our route handler. So request and response objects come in. And then simply put, what we're going to do here is we're just going to say, hey, I'm going to respond when something requests this. I'm going to respond with a status of 200. Now, what does a 200 status indicate? Well, you can go and you can look up all of the status codes that are available to you, but in the 200s, that usually indicates a success, okay? We're just going to say about us, okay? So, yeah, nothing great here, nothing crazy, but really all we're doing is we're just saying, hey, at this address, send back a response to the thing. I want to say thing because there's multiple things that can make this type of request. To the thing that actually made that request, we're going to send back this text. Because remember, we send text over the internet. Okay? All right. Sorry, I just got a DM that distracted me. Focusing right here. Okay, cool. Now, let's go ahead and make this request using Postman. So how many of y'all, just by raise of, like, click on this message with a thumbs up if you got into Postman at all? The Postman. Okay. So yeah, I believe that Luis mentioned it. Okay, if you gave me a thumbs down, that's great. Now is your opportunity. Okay. To go and download it, and we're gonna practice working with it today as we build our API in this little thing. Right now, you're not following along; you're just watching me what I do. For now, yeah, for now, and then we'll do it together, and then you'll do it on your own, and it's gonna be wonderful. Okay. All right. So Postman, it's a client. It's a REST client, meaning it's a application that allows us to work with APIs, okay? So and you notice, you guys, so by the way, y'all just came from React, right? That Heroku server, Heroku just sent me like a bunch of emails saying that I need to pay for increased dynos because of how much traffic you all sent to that server. So thank you very much. I have a credit card bill. No, I'm just kidding. But no, dead serious. They sent me traffic notifications saying, hey, if you want to increase your dynos. So whoever it was that did that for loop that just populated that database, man, y'all, that's the first time. That's been like the 5th or 6th iteration of that server. Y'all borked it for me. So thank you. I'm not going to pay for extra space. For that little toy server. Y'all can just suffer. It's your own fault. Okay, so let's go and let's run this request, and notice that we're going to get no response here. So we don't get any response because why? Why would I not get any response? It's probably not. It's so obvious that it's probably not obvious. Routes are not set up correctly. That's a good question. Server's not running. That's the good indication. So we'll get to Patrick's response there in just a second. But yeah, we're not getting any response because I haven't told my server to launch. I haven't told my server to be up and running on any particular port. Okay. So if I look here, I'm inside of API Mini, and now I can run npm start, or what was the command that Luis set up? I know it was different than that, so let me check it out. Thank you, Luis, for doing it this way. Okay, so yarn run server, right? Or npm run server. Yarn run server, and let's see what that does. Voila. Oh, ooh. Do not have SQLite 3. Boom. Okay. Just gonna go grab all my dependencies. So make sure that I have all my dependencies, because if I don't, then we're not good. Okay, looks like we're gonna be golden there as soon as yarn finishes to do its thing. Here I was thinking I had all my dependencies. No whammies. Boom. Okay, API running on port 8000. NodeMon is just sort of like a watching server that's going to go prop up your server and then listen for changes where your server is defined. So in your project, when you save this file, it's going to go refresh the server for you. Okay, so it's a little fun environment. Okay. All right, so let's go and test our stuff with Postman again. Great, look at that. We got our text back. And if I wanted to see a preview of what that would look like, you can click on the preview tab. So you can kind of format how your responses look in Postman, which is one of the nifty features about it. It allows you to see the raw text that was sent across the World Wide Web. It allows you to see what the preview would be if this actually were requested by a web page, okay, or a browser of some sort. And then it just is like, oh, we'll print this for you, give you some syntax highlighting. And notice that it chose like HTML as the standard format because it recognized HTML once it got here, okay? And if I looked at it inside of JSON, yeah, it's syntax errors. That's not JSON. That's not valid JSON. That's HTML that we just sent across the World Wide Web. When would HTML be handy to send across the World Wide Web? Just out of curiosity, what do you all think? Download for source code? Sure, yeah. I didn't even think about that. A scraper? Yeah. Never, Patrick says. Yeah, primarily we send JSON, right? Because we deal primarily with the front end. So in traditional sense, we used to send templates, HTML files across the World Wide Web. And that's how you used to get your web pages. It's like, hey, there's a file that lives in their server code. Let's go pull that file out, .html file, and send it across the World Wide Web. Okay, and then you would have your web page, and then you'd have to request the next page and whatnot. There's other, 404 pages. You could craft your own 404 response that just sends out some, a template, or you build your template on the front end, and then it's like you handle your errors properly. There's multiple ways of doing things. Okay. Tom said rendered web pages such as template files using the AJAX request sent. Yeah, you can have like a public 404. It's like, hey, you requested a resource. That thing doesn't exist, so we'll default back to this page. So yeah, you can send, it's text. It's still text, right? You can send it across the World Wide Web. So not very common anymore. Not as common as you'd like it to be, is my guess. So primarily handled through other outlets these days. Okay, so using Postman. So let's take a tour. I just ran a GET request to this 8000 port to the requested resource at API/about. Okay. So hopefully you all have Postman downloaded. If not, go ahead and download it now, because we are going to reconfigure this, and we're going to do this again with a post. Okay. We're going to do it together. And then I'm going to have you do it with a put. Now, we're not going to fully build out all the things necessary for those to be like actual endpoints, but we're going to communicate with Postman in that regard. Okay? And this is where the fun starts to begin. I love server-side code. Okay? So what is this called right here? What is this /API/about called? And it's the same thing that you learned in React. It's a route or a path. Yes, both are correct. We call it a route primarily in Node land, just Express land. Okay. Who knows what the entire thing is called? Ah, Tom already said it, and Brian. The entire thing put together would be called an endpoint. Okay. So we're crafting these endpoints that allow us to say, hey, from Postman, we want to request the resource that is found at this route, at this port, right, on our local machine. So let's do it again. Let's write another get. And you should all have your API mini projects pulled up. I'll give you 30 seconds to grab that and get it pulled up again. Get your port propped up on 8000, run your yarn run server. If you get the, what is it that's going on if you get that EARR end use error? Let me find a screenshot of that on the web and I can show it to you. EAR end use error, something like that. EADDRI in use. Yeah, your port's in use. Run over to your terminal if you're getting that. Run a Control-C to kill off your port. Okay, but if you ever see this, EAD driver in use, you have something listening on the same port already. Cannot use that one. The port number which listen tries to bind the server to is already in use. So in your case, there must be running server on port 80 already. Okay. So you're going to see that again. I see it still every once in a while. Forget to close my terminals. Make it a habit of closing your terminal, stopping your server when you're not using it. Okay. All right. What was Luis doing yesterday with the thumbs up, thumbs down, pause thing? If you all were ready to move forward together, I'm assuming he had like the chat open for Zoom, or what was it that he was doing? I was paying attention / working on other things. How do you want me to proceed to move forward? He made a poll. Okay. And you can go change your answers. You ready? Okay. I'll keep it anonymous. And then we'll add 2 options. See or no? Patrick was born ready. Okay, yeah. So who has a poll, right? Yeah. Are you ready to move on? Yes or no? Once we have like 35, 40 people ready to move on, we're just going to move on, right? Unless you get like mega errors and whatnot. That's one of the problems with following along in backend. Sometimes you get bogged down with errors that are just so difficult to debug, and it's hard to spend time debugging those in the classroom. So yeah. I'd say that's a large majority. You can click no if you're not ready, by the way. Ready means you have your server up and running on 8000. You're ready to type along with me. By the way, this example is coming right out of Training Kit. So if you do not get this together with me this morning, you can go right over to Training Kit for today. You can grab this example right there. We're going to build a little contact page, okay? So server.get, okay? What should our endpoint be? I want it to be something about our contact information. We just sent like about us in an H1. dot get forward slash, okay? Forward slash what? What are we going to put the rest of it, Patrick? Because we already have that path, that route taken, right? So we have to finish this with something. What do we want it to be? API slash contact. Let's do it. Let's follow our convention. Okay. Now we pass our anonymous callback, anonymous function. Who are the two that go in here? Rec and res, the homies. Okay. Every single node style callback will look like this. And in the future, when you learn about it, there's a third option. You don't need to know about next yet. But just so that you know, if you're looking at node code online, if you see the rec and res, it's a node style callback. Okay? Okay, let's bust this out. We're going to respond with a 200. 200 is indicating that that thing is there and we have a successful request. So we're about to say, hey, Postman, you're doing good. Okay? And we're going to send you back some of that content that you're asking for. In this case, we're going to build a little div. We're just going to say an H1, whoops. And it's going to be weird to do it all in line, but it'll be fun. We'll say contact, and then why don't you send a little input for it as well. It's going to be weird. I wonder if it works well. But yeah, we'll just send an input with the placeholder that equals, man, if this works, I'm going to be stoked. That equals email, right? Give us your email, it's your contact form. Why not try and make it a little bit more realistic, you know? Okay. So at the end of the day, you should have a little endpoint that's ready to rock and roll with a request handler function. It looks a lot like that. All right. Now let's go test it. Let's go over to Postman. And let's test contact. And let's make sure, you have to make sure it's a get, right? Let's try and do a post real quick. Let's see what Postman does for us if we send a post to API contact. Well, it's going to say, hey, cannot post to API contact. Notice that this error is different than the error that we got when my server was not running. This actually tried, it attempted to make the request because there is a server up on 8,000. Okay? In this case, it's really, really nice for us to kind of conceptualize and see that there are two different errors that you could potentially get. This is just saying, hey, you know, you're up and running on that port, but guess what? Postman, I cannot get anything there. There is no post there. So we need to write it as, we need to send it as a get request, just like Patrick mentioned in chat. So send that forward and look at this. This is our raw printed out HTML. Let's see what it looks like. Hey, that's not bad, man. We're building, who knew that you could send just like all the stuff that you worked with Josh and us across the World Wide Web using Node. Who knew that Node could do such a thing? Okay. Let me tell you, this is how websites used to be built. We don't necessarily have to do that anymore. We can run them all on the client. We can just communicate for the data, right? Okay. All right, we're cruising right along. We're going to take a break here in just a minute. So give me a minute. So there's two things to note here. We're using the same HTTP method on both of these endpoints, a get and a get, right? But Express will look at the URL and execute the corresponding request handler. So this is how Express works. We have a GET request that was sent to our port 8000, but the requested resource was found at two different specific routes. So we were able to get back our about us, respectively, and our contact, respectively. All we had to do in Postman was update the route that we were requesting the resource at, okay? So we can do this with Postman, but there's more. Did you know that you could do this with Chrome Diddly? Let's try it. Localhost. We're going to do 8,000. Whoa. Okay. /API/contact. Boom. So Postman sort of acts like a little bit of a beefed up browser. There's a lot more configuration and stuff and things that are under the hood that allows you to configure it. And it also allows you to send post requests, put requests, and delete requests. Browsers can only send out GET requests. So anytime you make a request to http://google.com, whatever, you get that information. So Postman, remember, it's a beefed up REST client. It's built so that you can test your API thoroughly and test all of the endpoints, right? Test everything that you do, okay? Chrome Diddly is not a thing. It's just a fun thing to say. Andrew says, is this what companies use to turn features on and off in apps without having to update the entire app? It's just generating the UI on the server and sending it over. I would have to sort of navigate that a little bit further to understand, but I think the answer that you're looking for is yes. You can basically, so what we do in the modern age, let's draw this out, and then we'll take a break, and we'll come back and work on a couple of other things together, okay? So you have your beautiful laptops. It has your Chrome Diddly web browser, your keyboards. You have your server. Server's always this big fancy machine, right? It's like bleep, bloop, blop, bleep, bleep. It's got all these little like cool bots in it, okay? And then of course you have your database. We're gonna be learning about this next week, but you're gonna be interfacing with the database today, so it's kind of good to understand kind of what's going on, right? So if you have a website, you did mean mobile apps. Okay, same thing. This could also be for mobile clients as well. Beep, beep, beep. This is an iPhone 10 because it's got the notch. Cool. X. Okay. So it doesn't matter, right? What matters is you build your code in like Swift or Objective-C. We'll just say C, O, Object-C. Okay. Or JavaScript. So that matters. But potentially, both of these applications could be requesting data. And you have already worked in this fashion already. These are called clients, okay? These two things are called clients. Client. Fancy term for a user interface or a web browser or a native application. Those clients are requesting JSON, or in previous cases, XML. It's not as commonly used anymore, but still out there, okay? The server interprets those requests and says, hey, are we good to go or no? What would be an example of are we good to go? Is this user logged in? Yeah, the user's logged in. Let's give that information back. The server's job will be to interpret that request, see if there's any database calls that need to be made and communication that needs to take place between the DB, right? DB data, like anything that's persisted, then yeah, we'll send that back across the World Wide Web. Like you have access to that, we're good to go. If there is no authentication, we would send some sort of 304 or a 404, like a not authorized, or that content doesn't exist, if that makes sense. Okay, so same principles apply. That same idea in twisted caveats applies to native Android and iOS applications. You have a client that requests data that lives on a server somewhere. Server talks to database. Server talks to client. Server figures out what, everything should and shouldn't be done. we're not really sending HTML across the World Wide Web in modern days. So this will not be, in our case, HTML. This was just merely an example of what potentially you could. In modern days, we're just sending the JSON. We're sending the XML, okay? So yeah, if somebody's not authorized, if an application has a feature flag that's like, that feature doesn't belong to that user yet, they're not a premium subscriber, then you would gate that information. And you're gonna learn all about that, okay? And yes, middleware is sort of like, you know, something that rests between the server and client. Thank you for complimenting my drawing skills. I would say they're like a 3 on a scale of 10, but had plenty of time to practice. So, okay, let's take a breather. Let's see, where are we at in time? Yeah, let's spend the next 7 or 8 minutes on a good break, and we'll come back at the top of the hour. And we got plenty of more to go through, plenty of fun examples to come up with. If somebody wants to screenshot that, y'all are welcome. I'll give you some time to do so. So go ahead and screenshot at your will as I get a 7-minute timer put up. Y'all good to go with the screenshot? I'll do another one just in case. Cool. And let me delete that garbage. Okay, I'm gonna take a break, so you should take a break too. Awesome. Let's jump back into our discussion now, because we got a road ahead of us that's gonna be really, really fun. And it's paved in route handlers. Let me get back to our locale. Okay. Awesome. Just making sure, Andrew, if I answered your question as good as I possibly can at that point. There's more that you're going to learn about those particular ideas. Okay. Okay. So when we build a RESTful client, a RESTful application, representational state transfer is what REST stands for, right? So state is sort of equivalent to data. And in our case, HTTP, we're just transferring text across the World Wide Web. So when we transfer data, right, when we're building a RESTful application, there are a few principles that we want to keep in mind. One of those principles is the verb-noun principle. So we think of our development in terms of common speech. We have an action to take place, or in our case, a way to communicate with the server. And then we have a noun or a resource that's available to us at those particular paths. So in our case, when we say, I want to action get the resource about that is found at this URL, right? So that's kind of how we design our things. So if you're building an application about hobbits, hobbits would be your resource, right? If you're building an application about users, users would be your resource. Friends would be other users. Those are also resources, and you kind of combine them together in your social network or whatever. Let's think about a blog, right? You're going to be working on a blog tomorrow and the next day. But yeah, you have posts, comments, and users. A user can create a blog post. Other users can comment on a blog post. Comments, users, posts, they're all resources. That's how you would have separate performing operations, verbs, that allow you to interface with those resources. Okay, so we've looked at get. Get is just, I want to do something with data that maps to a specific acronym of CRUD. What portion of CRUD does get map to? If I was to write out CRUD, what would the get be in that acronym? Read, right? We're going to read our data using a GET request. Okay, what about create? Post. Perfect. Okay, if we're going to create some data, in other words, if we're going to say, hey, server, I have some data for you to store in your database. I want you, server, to go and create that data. We're going to use a post request. Okay, so let's do that. Ryan looks like he's about to drop the rap album. This is my Twitch stream live. We're live chat. Okay, let's do it. Don't follow along with me. Just soak this all in, because there's some things that we're going to talk about along the way. Let me get out of here. Okay, since we have users down here, I'm going to separate everything. Oops. I do not mean to hit these hotkeys the way that I'm hitting them. Okay, here we go. Users. And you may have to bear with me because it's been a minute since I've used SQLite, Connects, and all of the above. But let's check this out. So if I go into our helpers file and look at our database, okay, so here it is. Here's the function I'm going to be able to use that is on our DB, okay? So it is going to accept a user. And then it's going to auto-populate with IDs. So I'm assuming, let's see, let's send a GET request. Let's look at what our users look like, okay? So this is where things you're going to have to sort of be like, I don't know all of what's going on here, but you can work with this, okay? You can work with this insert function. You can send data through the insert function, and you can do something with the database with it, or for your database, okay? So it's going to return a promise, which we can then thenify, then chain. Let's go to our postman real quick, and let's make an API GET request to users so I can see what our user information looks like. Looks like we got a body back. Sorry, I'm trying to make it pretty. Okay. So we just need a name and a bio, and I think everything else is created under the hood for us. Okay. By the way, if you don't know Chris Atoki, he was like one of our original PMs section leads. This is a pretty cool cat. You can follow him on Twitter. He's got a job, and he's a Lambda success story for sure. I love Chris. So that was his Atoki bot. Everyone wanted to figure out a way to clone him, but we only had so many resources, okay? All right, so what we're gonna do is we're going to say name and bio are the things that we're gonna send across the server. Now, you have done this before in your HTTP AJAX week, okay? So you have sent information across the World Wide Web to be stored as an object, okay? So now you're gonna kind of look and see how that works on the other side of the veil. We're going to write, and you don't need to do this, I'm going to do this, and then we'll do it together. Server.post, and that's going to be /API/users. Why would it be the same URL as found above? Well, the answer to that is because we have a GET request, that's the verb. We have a POST request, that's the verb. These will behave in a different way. So it's like Express is saying, hey, when Postman is going to send a GET request to API/users, we're going to send back this information. When a POST request is made by Postman to API/users, we're going to handle it in this way. And here's the answer to the question about the request object. When do we use request? Well, you'll use request primarily on posts, okay? So there are people who do know Atoki. Awesome. GET and POST are similar, only POST has a header with data or something like that. It's not quite a header, but there is a property on a POST request on the request object called the body. Okay, and you're about to learn how to read the body. So soak this in, don't try and follow along, but we're gonna read from the request object's body. We're going to take a look at what we send across the World Wide Web, and you're going to be stoked about it. Okay, because this is like, you've already done this with React. You typed in a form, you built an object, and then you sent it through AJAX, through Axios up to a server, right? Now it's like, oh, how does that server deal with this? Well, we're going to peel back the curtain and show you. This is the magic that was happening on those Smurf APIs or the Friends or the movies. This is how it works, okay? So we can just simply console.log for the request object, and I'm just going to say rec.body. I just want to look at the object that we're sending across the World Wide Web, okay? And that's what we're going to do for now. Then what I'm going to do is I need to terminate every single request that I make, okay? If you ever get a Postman request or a request from your browser and it just hangs up, it just continues to spin and nothing happens, it's because most likely you're not terminating your requests. You have to end your requests in Node. How do we end our requests in Node? Well, we send some sort of response either via JSON or some sort of response via .send back to the client, okay? So that's how we stop our requests from continuing. Otherwise, Node is just going to be like, we didn't terminate the request, that we must be needing something more. So we need to call a res.send here at the very minimum. Send and .json effectively achieve the same thing. .json just JSON stringifies it for you. Just makes it so it's nice and easy to send it over the World Wide Web, okay? And I'm just going to send success, okay? Post to API users, we're going to console log the rec body, we're going to send a success. Now, okay, we're good to go, because this is going to help me talk about my next concept. Beautiful. I love how this builds. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Luis, for providing some amazing, amazing information. Okay, so if I now have a post over to localhost 8000/API/users, right? I'm going to send information on the body. So notice that this body tab is right here. With a get, there is no body, okay? Can't click there. With a post, however, there is a body. I can click there, okay? So now we have all these other options that drop down in this little key value pair. Okay, we're not going to send form data. We're not going to send whatever this is, URL encoded data. We're going to send raw data, okay? And now we have some options of the types of raw data that we can send. We don't want to send binary. I don't want you working in binary. I want you to look right here, and I want you to select the type of data that we want to send across the World Wide Web. What is it? Which of these would you like to send through Postman up to our API/users post endpoint? Haha, it's got to be JSON. JSON is de facto. It's not de facto. It's just, I mean, there's plenty of things that we can send, right? But you're going to be working with JSON the majority of your time as a developer, as a web developer. We love JSON. We love the advent of this standard format, okay? So now that you're sending it raw, you have to write raw JSON. So there are some rules to raw JSON that you may or may not know. First rule is everything's in double quotes. Key value pairs, all in double quotes. Okay, so we're going to send up name. I'm going to send up Leroy Jenkins. Okay? Other things to note, you cannot have trailing commas, meaning if there are no properties found after the comma, notice what's going to happen here. Bad string. Okay? There are syntactical standards for this format, for JSON format. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to say, what was it? The bio? What's Leroy's bio? Was he like a human paladin? Something like that? Cool. All right, Leroy. Let's see what happens. Remember, our endpoint is only set up to console log something and then send a response back to the client. Okay? So the response we should see in here will not be a JSON object. It will be a success. Every single time we hit that endpoint, we're going to get a success. What's important is what we actually log to the console. Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, where can I see that console? What do you guys think? Where can we see that console? I have a shirt that says I love JSON. I love it. Let's do this. Server in VS Code. So I'm not running my server in VS Code. I'm actually running it in Hyper. But yeah, I should be able to see it there. Uh-oh. We got an undefined. What? Why did we get an undefined? Let's think all the way back to yesterday. That was many hours ago. When Luis talked to us about how the good thing about Express is that it's lightweight. Right? Is that there are things you need to do with it. Success is raw text. It's just a string, right? But we are console logging the request object body, okay? But we did not tell our server to communicate via JSON. So we need to configure that on our own. You have to manually configure what types of text you're going to send across your server. So the same way that you had configured cores yesterday, which you're going to learn a little bit more about tomorrow when we talk about middleware. Cores is a beast, by the way. There's no way we can tackle everything in our time here at Lambda School. Cores is huge. But we're going to do another middleware plugin, and we're just going to simply invoke express.json. So now what we just did is we just changed our server. We just said, hey, server, I want you to communicate in JSON. It's like our server's sort of a robot, and you can select different types of languages. We just selected JSON. It's like the language that I want you to communicate with is JSON. People interfacing with you will send you JSON. You will communicate back to them in JSON. That's the idea there, okay? Otherwise, that request body object won't receive any of that data. So we need to configure that request body object to be able to work with JSON. Okay? So let me make a note there because that's what this server is good for. Oh, and it won't let me do that on that side. So you'll just have to, I didn't realize that this formatted. I'm giving you these at the end of the day, by the way. So, okay. Server.use express.json. Format the code in JSON. Formatting our rect.body object. Okay. All right, now that we saved that, let's go see what happens. Come on, Postman, don't fail me now. Okay, we got our success. Hey, check it out. In the wild. Leroy is found in the wild. Patrick says, we need body parser. It's very, very true. Express, so many people were using body parser as a third-party package for so long that Express was like, hey, we're just going to throw it in and we're going to have the default to body parser JSON. Okay? All right, how's everyone doing at this point? I hate calling anyone out, but Ezra, you look like you have this look of disdain, like, oh man, there's a lot going on here. It's true, there is a lot. It's not like, you know, pretty and formatted on the world, you know, on the web page anymore. We're putting it all together. Yeah, I am worried. I want to make sure that everyone, you know, is kind of following along. Once again, I hate calling people out. I just saw like your hands on your face. I'm like, so we're going to practice this. We're going to work with this. Okay. All we did here is just configure our server to use JSON. Okay. So that way, when we send up on our Postman, we're going to configure this as JSON, raw JSON. This is data that we're going to transfer from Postman up to our server. Now, think about your client-side projects that you've built thus far. When you were saving notes, you gathered this information from web forms, okay? You handled that information in React, then you saved that information to what data type? It was an object, right? Name, age, or so if it's a note, it's title and copy, right? Or content, I don't remember. But yeah, title, note title and then text body or whatever, you had all of this data, all of this user input that you saved onto an object with key value pairs. We are using Postman to do that for us. We're just writing it. We're skipping the step of having a client where the user inputs information. Okay? Postman is just taking this information and it'd say, I'm going to send this information up to API/users. Now, at our endpoint, how do we work with that information? Well, we pull it off of the rec.body. Okay? This is just one way in how you can read, one of a few ways that we're going to learn today, how you can read information from a request. The request came in and said, hey, I have some data. If we're posting that data, then it's going to be on the rec.body object. Okay? But we need to finish our endpoint. But you can see what we can do now with this, if you look at our console, is we can say, I want to take that information and store it in the database. This right here is what we just sent to the World Wide Web. We intercepted that request on our endpoint and console.logged it here. Okay, so we're going to store Leroy in our database. And yes, you could destructure that object. That's a beautiful way to do it. So let's do it that way. Const name and bio are going to be variables that we pull off of the rec body that are mapped to specific properties on the rec body object. And we can now create new user equals name and bio respectively. So now we can interface with our database. So I'm going to call db.insert. Remember, .insert, if we go there, takes in a user, which is just going to be an object, and then inserts it in the database for us. Then it's going to send back some sort of response. So let's test it out. So as soon as I insert, I'm going to pass my new user up to insert, and then it's going to return a promise. So how do I handle that promise? .then. Catch. Okay. Now, if I shape it like this, let's just see what it sends back. So I think it's going to be the new inserted user. So inserted user is going to be what the database sends back to me or something. We'll figure it out in a second. Now we want our res.send as a success. We could change this to a new message and say res.send user created. But first, I want a status that sends back that says that we did something proper. Now, off the top of your head, who knows the status code for a successful create? I think it sends back the ID of the new user. That's good. 200. Okay. If it sends back the ID, we can do something a little bit creative. So we'll check it out. It's not a 200. 200 is a successful read. A 201 is a successful create. Okay, so we'll say status that to a 201, por favor, and then send back the user created. But I just want to see the ID, okay? So I'm going to send back the inserted user as well, just so we can see what that is. And then if there's an error, the database is going to give us that error and say, we need to do something with that. Res.send error, and that's when you would say, you'd have to figure out what type of error it is and send your status code back respectively. Okay? Okay, lots to soak in here, but we're going to step through it one by one, and we're going to do it together in just a minute. Okay? Let's check it out. Yeah, if it sends back the ID, we can do a lookup and send back the new user. Let's do it. Uh-oh. What happened? Ooh. Invalid status code, huh? Res.stat, oh, derp. Why? Unhandled, invalid status code user created. Res.send status body. What line is that on? Does it just want JSON of some sort? And to send objects back? Unexpected token, not anymore. Okay, wow. We did a status up here, 200. Okay, let's check it out. Maybe there was something weird that happened there. User created. Okay. So it was that I was trying to send an improper format. It's a big, big error. But notice what we can read here from Postman. So this is another tour of Postman. 201 created. That's the specific response that we got. Okay? The request has been fulfilled and it resulted in a new resource being created. So in this case, we have this weird object now that says user created with an exclamation point and ID. I was just labeling it, but we sent it back in an object. But yeah, it looks like we have a 4 there. I think we now have 4 total records in our database, which means we created twice. So let's double check that. How can I double check that? Well, I can change my request over to a get, and I can go fetch all the users. If you look, Leroy Jenkins has infiltrated our database 2 times. Is it not proper to simply do db insert request body? I'm unclear why we need a const name and bio. The idea was, so normally, Sai, what you want to do is you want to check this input and sanitize it. Make sure that there are no spaces and make sure it formats the right way. So this is a proper way of handling that request. You don't ever really want to just go and insert a request body directly into your database without properly sanitizing your input. So what we did is we just sanitized the input by saying, I only want the name and bio. Any other fields are going to get ignored, right? So if somebody sent some sort of malicious like SQL injection there, it's like, I want you to send me a query of all your, your admin users with their passwords too, right? They could have sent that script, that SQL query, in as a property on the body object. If you don't sanitize it, you're prone to security flaws. Okay. Would or should we be checking that the request body has both name and bio before we create a user on our server.post functions? And yes, the answer to that is yes. You want to most definitely check this stuff. So how would you do that? Just a couple of conditionals. If name is defined and is type of string, whatever, something like that, you can do all, that's just pseudocode, but you can check those things, right? You want to make sure that you sanitize that input. Now, when you get to you work with connects, there's actually built-in validators for you. It's like, hey, that input is supposed to be this type. And you build your schema in that way. Okay? All right, let's work with this together now. Let's delete it. We're going to write post request together. Go ahead and set that up in your server. Copy and paste. And when we build this one, since we know it sends us back an ID proper, what we're going to do is we're going to use that ID to do a database lookup and then send the information back. We're going to do this together, folks. It's going to be so freaking fun. I don't know about you, but this is when I started to really fall in love with code. when I saw all the hard work, like who here thinks that building user interfaces is easy? Okay, nobody, right? Carrie, and yeah, right. It's not easy. Yeah, it's not. It's definitely difficult to put together a pixel perfect design all the way to fruition, handling data, handling state, managing your state. It's not easy. I think backend is easier because you don't have to deal with a lot of those fun things. But one of my, yeah, pixel good is enough. Pixel good enough is easy. True, true. One of my things I love to muse on is the fact that I learned this stuff not too long ago. It was only about 5 years ago that I started learning this stuff. So for me, I emulate, or I empathize with you. I'm like, hey, these were things that clicked for me. Now, not all learners are like me. I'm a terrible design-minded person. I am, I can take a design and turn it into code and do pretty dang good with it. But like, I prefer working with servers, input, output, very mathematical style of a mind where function f of x equals, f of x, whatever, just one of those things. That's all this is. Function has 2 arguments. This function has a couple of parameters that we can use. We just wire it up. We learn the syntax to wire it up. Okay, y'all should have copied and pasted that server.post into your servers. And we're gonna build this endpoint together. Then we're gonna go take another break. We come back, we're gonna do delete and put. But I'll give you a little like vision of delete first so we can delete all those Leroys, okay? So first thing that we need to do is we need to look at what property on the request object do we need to look at if we're gonna post data or if we're gonna create data? Yep, we want the body. So follow me for now until you're ready to break out on your own and do something in any sort of other special way. We're gonna say name and bio come off of the rec.body. By the way, it looks like our questions answers thread has sort of gotten away from us. Let's try and put questions and answers back there and all the GIFs and the http.cat URLs back in the main, just to clean it up a little bit. Don't be sorry, don't worry about it. It's my fault, I let it get away from us. Okay, what is this called when we take properties off of an object and assign those properties that are supposed to be named bio and name to these variables? Deconstruction, destructuring, yes. You can call it, it's destructuring. We're destructuring this object, okay? We are saying there is a name and a bio field found on the body object. Now create us variables in the scope of this function called name and bio. Awesome, great way to think of it, Brian. Okay, so now that we have those variables, we're gonna create a new object. So we're gonna call it new user. We're gonna set that equal to the name and property fields respectively to their mapped data. Name is gonna create a key value pair of name and whatever we call the name, and bio, a key value pair of bio to whatever we set to the bio in our JSON object in Postman, okay? Now we're going to call db.insert. So I want you to physically go to your database file at this point because you have these helper methods that are designed to be very semantic as to what they are going to do. So if we find all the users, we're just finding the users, right? If we're finding by ID, what does our method need from us? It needs at the very least an ID, right? Can't remember if that needs to be a string. Oh, it coerces it to a number. Okay, cool. Insert, very semantic. It's gonna go and do what? Create a user. It's gonna insert a user into our database. What about update? What is that gonna do? It's gonna update an existing user. What about remove? delete, destroy. You have your CRUD operations all packaged in one beautiful little db.js file. This is, and then they work by using connects, and you'll learn all about that next week. Very, very soon, you'll learn all about how to do that yourself, okay? But yeah, for now, that's how you read those. They're your helper methods. They're designed to map themselves to CRUD operations. When we're RESTful, we work in CRUD. We work in verbs and nouns, and we work in CRUD when we're RESTful, okay? All right, db.insert then. We're going to insert our new user that we just created. And what does this function call return? What's the built-in object type that this function call returns for us? Not quite, Patrick. That's when we work with the thing, but this function call is going to return what? It's a big capital P. Yes, it's a promise. This will give us a promise. There's no way that you could know that unless you looked at the connects documentation or one of us told you, or you look at how we're working with .find. Okay, if there's a then and catch, there's some sort of asynchronous code going on, okay? Just gotta be pretty up to date with it. Okay, so now we call .then, we call .catch. In this case, we're just gonna console.error out our error. Okay, if there's an error that happens. Otherwise, we're gonna take our ID. Sorry, I need to try to go slower. I'm sorry. Okay, take our ID and we want to do a lookup with it. So we can now call db.findById, send it in our new ID that we just got back that was just created, and guess what? We can call it .then. Kind of crazy, but we can do it. We should be able to do it. And this should be then the user that we just created, and we should res.status. In this case, we're not really statusing, but yeah, it is a 201, and then JSON stringify the user. Now, traditionally, you should handle this error here as well. That's going to get real ugly. So we'll just leave it at that for now. Let me look through this code that Tom sent through. Rec and res, new user. If name and bio are undefined, then we get a 400. Please provide me a name or bio for the user. So that's probably more like 422, but you're onto something there. Then we db.insert new user, then users, res.status, JSON users. Okay, and then a catch on the 500 error. There was an error. Yeah, 500 would be APIs down. Brian said, I think it's this line, and then posted a line. I'm not sure. Is that what you mean is the, what do you mean by that? But yeah, we should be okay here. We're doing 2 database lookups, which is kind of a bummer. But yeah, we're doing our insert, create our new user, gives us back an ID. Then we have the ID, so we're going to do a lookup. So if you got there, your code should look a little bit like this. Oh, what insert returned? Yeah. Yep, I gotcha. We're on the same wavelength, Brian. You're right. Okay. All right. Let's send it up. Let's go back to our post. Okay. And look what's cool about Postman. It'll save your recent requests. Okay. If you go back to your body, always, always, always turn on JSON. Okay. We're going to send a new name here. That name is going to be Link. Link is a human warrior. Sure. Hails from Hyrule. Cool. We'll send that up. Who's ready? He's Hylian. All right. Oh. There we go. Ooh. We got a 201, but we didn't get our response back, which means I don't know what this user is. We got the 201 because the only place there's a 201 in my code, we got to this line. How do I know that we got the 201? Let's go back to Postman. Where on my screen, give me a general direction on my screen as to where I can look for the 201. Status code, but where at? Where's that found? Give me like a north, south, east, west. Status on the right, right side, middle, perfect. Yep, right there. It says we created it. We got the success, which means we got a success back from the database. So let's go figure it all out. Let's go figure out what just happened. I'm going to create link again just because I don't want to go change my data. I'm being lazy. But yeah, that user's undefined. So either I have a typo or this isn't working for me yet, which sucks because I thought it would. Yeah, there's a problem. Needs to be id.id. Oh, yeah, let's console log that. Okay, my first suspicion was that we had a race condition. My next suspicion, I think Alejandro solved for me. This is why I code in front of students, because they test me and they help me debug. Ah, that's our problem. We're sending an object and it's going to try and JSON stringify an object, and yeah, it's bad news. Okay, so what are we going to do to fix my code? Well, I need to destructure that ID. Or I'll just say ID I'm going to call this user ID. Give me the ID, send that up so that we're not, because right here, what we were sending was a full object with a key value pair of ID and a number. Okay, now we're going to send the actual number up. It's going to go and do the real lookup, and we're going to get my response back. Ah, Patrick is getting a SQLite constraint error. Well, let's debug that in just a second. Okay, so yeah, we'll debug that. So what needs to happen here now is I need to tell myself if user is undefined, because that's what we were getting, then return, I'll tell you why I'm returning here. I just want to stop the code. I don't want to send two statuses back, so I'm just going to return and stop this function from executing. I'm going to return res.status, and I'm going to say a 422. That status code indicates that you requested a resource that, or it's bad input, just bad user input on my part. And we'll say .send, and we'll just send an error message back home and say user does not exist by that ID. And what I can do is I can template string it and send the ID. So that way, debugging this is so much easier in the future. And I was trying to send a user ID, right? But now that we know the problem, I'll just send the ID. 499.9, user error. Please replace user and try again. Yeah, right. Get out of here. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, so, and then Patrick, let's debug what you got. because they think I know that something is off. Not null constraint field means that your users.name on your object is not defined, or it's null. It's usually what that means. Okay, let's go check it out. Now we'll send it, and voila. The 8th record in our database is link human warrior. If I go and send a get, do the same thing. Okay, and then we're going to figure out how to delete all these bad records, because we've got a lot of records in here when we get back from break. But let's take 5. And I'm going to send you that code. I'm going to send you everything I have up to this point so that when we get back, we can all start on the same error, or the same place. Okay? Okay, and yeah, first thing we'll do when we get back is we'll debug Patrick's code live on air, on screen, because it's a good exercise. Okay, go take a break. Slack. We'll get rocking on it. So the part that's giving you the error, so show me your post. I'm assuming you're getting the error on the post. It's referencing a specific user's object and a name field. It's in your git bash. Well, it's got to be in your code is giving you that error. So let's see just your post request to the users. And if it's too much, we can just debug it at lunch. Why don't we just do that? Let's just, you and I will sit down and debug it at lunch. Anyone who wants to stay after. Getting that error with my code. Okay, cool. Let's do a debugging session at the end of this session. I know that we're going to run a little long today. My assumption is that you're kind of used to that a little bit. I don't want to make a habit of it, but we have yet to touch on a delete and a put. Okay. Yeah, let's move. If you can't get any response, what's the error if you can't get any response? Your server must have crashed. You may need to restart it. So you can try that. So yeah, I'm not sure. Well, let's debug in a minute. Cool. Okay, so let us look at the delete, because we want to delete all these Leroy Jenkins and links that we posted into our database, right? So how are we going to do that? Server.what? Delete. Okay. Now, this is where things get really fun, because we're going to say, I want to send a request to API/users, but now I want to make this URL a dynamic request. How do I do that? How do I make this dynamic? Who remembers from React Router a trick that I can do to make this, a URL parameter? There we go. And I'm just going to say ID, because we're going to send up the ID of the resource that we want deleted. So now we have our homies, just like normal. And instead of pulling off the rec body, we want to pull the information that's found off of the params object that's on the rec body. But first, let's just console log that. That params object is there to give us, just like with match.params in React Router, it's going to give us a key value pair of ID and the number that we sent. Okay? And let's just res.send. We can just send back the params object itself. Okay, we'll save that. Give us a minute to do this all together while we query the database for this information as well. So let's test it real quick though. And we need to find one of our Leroy Jenkinses. And what do I need to configure this to? How do I need to change my thing? We're going to do a destroy or delete request, right? So instead of, you can send a body with a delete request, by the way, but not necessary here. We're not even going to worry about sending that. We're going to send the information that we want on the URL. So in our case, it's going to be 4. We want to delete that user. So if I send that across the World Wide Web, ooh, params is not defined. Whoops. Whoops. Rec dot. Got to actually read from the right object. Here we go. So this is the second way that I have now taught you in how to read information that's coming into your server. The first one was on the rec.what body. The second one now is on rec.params. Okay? Very important to understand the distinction there is that anything defined after this API/users/slug, that's what this is called, ID, we get a key value pair of an ID mapped to whatever it is it's found there. And that key value pair is going to look this. So what do we do? What do we do right here? Let's take that information. The client is saying, I have some information to give you, server. So let's take it. Take it from the client. And we'll say const ID equals rec.params. In essence, you structure that object. So now we're going to call db dot, and if you have IntelliSense, it's telling you what methods you have in that file. We're going to remove. We're going to send our ID. The promise. You don't want to send 2 responses back. We'll get an error for that. Only one response terminates the request. Okay? So what do we do now? Let's go figure it out. How can we figure it out? How can we figure out how to work with this remove? Just go straight into the file. Okay, it's going to go find an ID, coerce it to a number. So it's saying, hey, find the user whose ID equals this ID, and then delete it. Cool. It's going to return that, so it's a promise. So let's see what it gives us back. So we're going to say removed user or something. And then what I want to do is res.status. Ooh, I don't remember the delete code. Who wants to look that up for me? And error res.send. You want to terminate your errors as well. We've just been console logging. Res.send, and then whatever your error code should be, whatever. We're just going to say console.error for now as we're debugging this stuff. Okay. What's the successful delete code? I bet it's in our training kit. It's not. 202, is that what it is? 202 status code. Take your word for it. Accepted. No, it's not really an accepted, is it? Reset content, let's see. Moved permanently is a 301. That's not good though. We'll just do a 200 for now. And I'll have to do some more research on that and let you guys know. I'm not sure. We should try JSON. Yeah, we'll keep it congruent because it's going to stringify it to JSON anyway. Oh. Thank you, Hootman. Okay, let's check it out. Now that we go back to Postman, call a delete with our for. It's going to remove that record. And oh, it gives us a 1 or a 0. I forgot about SQLite doing that. So SQLite's going to give you a 1 or a 0. Darn. So you can respond to that accordingly. It's binary. 1 meaning the record was deleted, 0 meaning the record was not found to delete. Does that make sense? Okay. So hopefully you're seeing the pattern here. You build an endpoint, a place that you can communicate. You communicate with your database in the proper way. You test that with Postman all the time. That's just your pattern. Everything you do, you test with Postman in the back end. Or you can use another web client. There's one that's built into VS Code that's really cool called REST client. You can look at Insomnia, which is a really cool client as well. It's very, very beautiful UI. Postman is sort of commonly used. Okay. All right. The last thing that we need to talk about that's putting us over the time limit. So we're going to go 10 minutes or so over time, but we need to talk about it, is what's called the query string. Query string is a question mark found in the URL. Okay. So we're going to build a put. Well, query strings are more commonly used for like sorting and whatnot, but I'm not going to worry too much about that for now. We can do that in our review tomorrow morning. But yeah, so for the query string, it's another way for us to pass information between clients and servers. It is also, just like the ID, it's structured as a set of key value pairs. Okay? So if you were to design a put request, you'd actually use an ID, like a params, instead of a query string. But we can capture information on a query string from any of our endpoints. Let me show you how. Okay? So first thing that I want to do is I just want to console.log inside my server.get. We're going to say rec, and who knows what it is. Query. Okay? Here's where, this is the third way to read information from a requested resource. So we're going to go, and we're not going to really do much with this at this point. You're going to do more with this in your assignment this afternoon. But we're going to just request some information with a query string. And we're just going to say whatever query here, or whatever user, we're just going to say we're going to map that to a U. And yeah, usually you can do, so you can do a whole bunch of things here. Dang it, I wish I had like a better thing for you. But this is really, really cool. So we're just going to say, we're just going to put some arbitrary information up here like Ryan. Okay? So now if I send that information up across the World Wide Web, we made the request as normal, but let's look right here. Oh, it's console logging everything. But look, right here. This is the important information that we needed. Look at what our query string just did for us. Trying to do it side by side. So right here, inside of our query, we put a key value pair of you, the user, setting equal to Ryan. Okay? So in this case, we got that key value pair console log to us in the console. Oh, the cool new features in Postman. Yeah. So this is commonly seen in what type of environment? Who knows? Where have you seen this before? Just Google Munchkin kitten. What just happened? Look at my URL. What was the query that we just sent up to Google? Well, it's Munchkin kitten. It took that information and it went and did all of its sourcing, did all of the things it's going to do based on that information that we put right here in this input. Okay? So commonly used, query strings are commonly used in sorting. So if I wanted to say sort right here, I could then say ascending. Send that information up again. Well, come on now. There it is. And then we could say the data that I want to send back, let's go ahead and sort that in ascending order. So from 1 to infinity. Or the other terminology is descending. We could say, oh, the user wants this sorted descending. So how does this trigger? How does this work within a front-end application? Well, normally when you're sorting data, you have this giant list of data, and you send up some qualifiers for that data. And you say, I want to sort that data by date between X and Y. You would put that type of information on a query string. Anytime you have like a search or a filter, you have a list of 1,000 records, you want to filter by something, you would send that information up on a query string. That's what they're used for. I believe in your assignment this afternoon, you'll work with a little bit of querying for data and the like. So let's take a look at where this all ties in together. A post, a get by ID, a delete, and an edit. And this is the last thing that we're going to touch on today is the edit in the next 5 minutes. I did not keep track of my time really well. But yeah, make sure you're following your status codes really well through this assignment. Okay. So let's do one more delete or one more edit real quick. We haven't done an edit yet. Okay. But those are the 3 ways to send information and receive that information and work with that information. The rec.body, rec.query, and the rec.params. Okay, queries can be tacked on to any endpoint you'd like. Okay, I don't want this anymore on that. It's a lot of users to log out. Queries can be anywhere. Very specifically, params need to be formatted in this way. So let's do our server.put to end it. Then you're going to have plenty of time to play with all this afternoon. So we're going to say API/users/byId. Request and response. You don't have to try and follow along. I'm going to give you this file when you're done, and your mini project is pretty much done from this. There is one more that you can go and read by ID. So you can go and say, I want to build a get that just reads by ID. You can do that on your own right after lunch for the mini. And so now we're going to take that ID, off of the params. We're going to say db.update. Okay, this is where things get a little bit tricky because you have to send in the ID, but with an update, you also have to send in the new updates. So where are we going to pull in those new updates? Where are we going to pull in the new updates from the front end? The client's got to give us the new updates. It's got to be off of the body, right? So we need to pull that information off of our request body because we're sending that up as an updated information. If we are hitting this endpoint, we are saying we want to edit something, find it by ID, send up our user. So we're going to say name and bio. Whoops. Direct body. I'm going to say const new user equals name and bio. And there are plenty of things that you want to do to check that these exist. We're just going to send it up as if they exist every single time right now. But you're going to need checks in all of these. By the way, not all of these endpoints are finished. There are things you're going to want to do to check your data. And then there's going to be edge cases where you could break your code that you're going to want to play around with. Okay? You have to read those bullet points in your afternoon assignment to kind of get hints on what you need to do there. If there's a status code of this, or if this error happens, send this type of status code. So we'll say new user, then. And it looks like it's going to send back. It's probably just going to send back a user object. So there's that status. And then anything updated, pretty sure update. We'll do 200 for now. It's good to memorize your status codes, but I've never had to. And then we'll JSON that user back. Okay? Otherwise, okay. Please, please, please double check that this information has conditions. Always check your updates and respond accordingly. This endpoint isn't finished. Holding down caps for that. Cool. Let's see it in action. Back to Postman. You build it, you test it. Every single time. We're going to call users. The user we want to update, we're just going to update the ID 3, Leroy Jenkins here. So we're going to find by ID. Whoops. Better give it the right thing. We're going to go into our body object. We're going to craft some new information. Name. See that Leroy had an existential crisis. Changed his name to G-Roy Lenkins. Bio human paladin. Okay? Send that information. And oh, we just get a 1 back. Okay. So now let's go request all of our users again. Hey, it did not work. It did not like what I put. Okay, let's go check it out. We're sending that user back. Come on, really? It didn't work? Oh yeah, it did. G. Roy Lincolns. It did. Derp. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave those debugs in there. It did work. I just didn't read. A J and an L are hard on a Tuesday morning for me, I guess. It's Tuesday afternoon now. So there's a lot here. We kind of went quickly and slowly at some points through a lot of this stuff. But the big things to remember and to recap for the rest of your day are RESTful principles indicate that you have some sort of verb and a noun that you're trying to perform an action upon. Every single place that you go to is found via a route. Every route is handled by a route handler or In other words, some piece of middleware that we're going to talk about tomorrow that allows you to grow or allows you to do and perform operations within the body of that middleware. Okay? So, new user created. These are the user updates. Pulling information off of your places that you can pull information from, i.e. params, body, and of course the query string from the example above, which we deleted. Yeah, we deleted that. Okay. But that's what's super important to remember is there's 3 places you can pull information from off of the request object. And of course you can pull information off of headers too, but you don't need to worry about that. But there's 3 places you can pull information from on your request object. Okay? The params, the body, and the query. And then depending on what was actionable, call your database. It really is that simple. All of your methods map to some sort of operation that is built into your database. And that's how things work all the time, every single time in REST. It's all CRUD. It's all create, read, update, delete. After this recap, does anyone have any questions before we try and debug? Is it possible to reorder the IDs in SQLite? It sure is. I think there's an example of that found in Training Kit. Luis kind of went to town on providing you a good example. I kind of ran out of time, and I could show you a little bit more about that tomorrow morning after you've had ample time playing around with it this afternoon. So if you look at server-side routing, this stuff right here, when he talks about query strings, okay? Sort by. Oh, he's just calling a sort on, the array. So yeah, that works really, really well. Look up how sort works, array.sort, and then give it your qualifiers. Cool. Awesome. He's got a full-on hobbits example in there. He's got really, really great examples. For me, I was just working right out of the little playbook, the little code. Okay. Those who were getting errors, Patrick, are you still getting errors? What's going on? Or is there anyone who needs me to debug their application with them before? I mean, everyone else can go to lunch if you don't have anything else. So there's the full file. Okay, that's from the mini. So that's basically a solution to the mini. You can augment and detract from that solution as much as you need. So yeah, Patrick, why don't you share your screen and let's debug. And those who want to go to lunch can. I won't even record this last part. By the way, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope it was resourceful. Okay, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself as well.